On today's Locked On Thunder podcast, the Oklahoma City Thunder have made some massive moves this offseason. Where do they shake out, though, in the Western Conference?
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get it going on the Locked On Thunder podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. I am your host, media member, and Inside the Thunder beat writer Rylan Stiles. Follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Follow the show on Twitter at LOThunderPod. Email the show, LOThunderPod@gmail.com. On today's show, we're diving into the Thunder making massive moves this offseason. Has that made them the top team in the West? Has it changed the expectations at all? How does everything fit together for this Oklahoma City Thunder team? Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Go download the Game Time app, create your account, use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions do apply. We're joined today by Michael Martin at Michael on Sports on Twitter. Let's Talk Thunder on YouTube. Michael, how you doing today?
Doing great. Happy to be back on the show. Hopefully have my wind in me talking hoops. We're in the off season, so we'll see.
We'll see how we look in off-season form. But, Michael, we have not had a pod since these massive moves for Oklahoma City. Let's start with the latest one, and that's Isaiah Hartenstein. What was your initial reaction whenever, it was long rumored, and then you see the visit to Oregon, and then they actually do land their biggest free agent, in franchise history? What was your initial reaction to the news?
I was a little bit surprised, but not shocked. I mean, you know this as well as anyone, just sort of the idea of a big-time free agent coming to Oklahoma City, which I know Isaiah Hartenstein isn't just like the LeBron James, Paul George, biggest name out there, but in terms of this free agency class, he was one of the best five players probably available who switched teams. So that was surprising, but when Presti went over there and then locked the deal in, and then as we got more news with the contract coming out, that was a little bit shocking. With the big number, we knew it was probably going to be like a balloon contract, but then even more info comes out and we see that it's going to be a team option on the last year, and it's like, what a steal on that. So I'm very excited with the deal. I understand some of the sticker shock that some fans have had about the big number, but the reality is they were in a use it or lose it situation with this cash, and I'm happy how they used it.
Yeah, it was a very good use of their opportunity here. It was an awkward opportunity, or I should say like a unique opportunity of, this huge payday doesn't mess up anything with extending your top three guys. And it kind of perfectly threads the needle of those two things. And it makes the team a lot better. So you have a whole video on your channel, Let's Talk Thunder, about Hartenstein's fit with the Thunder. But just as an overview, how do you think that he works his way into this Thunder team, and what does he bring to the table?
I think that Thunder fans are going to be very happy with his play on the floor. He's not the ideal, the Thunder we've always talked about, spacing from their five. They want to play five out. Hartenstein's not a shooter from three. He's not somebody who I expect to shoot from three. I shared a stat with you the other day about the threes that he made in his Clippers season, which people have quoted about when he shot 14 of 30. 10 of those makes were in games that were in a 20-point margin at the time when he made them. So I'm a little bit skeptical of that, but who knows, with Chip's help, maybe he can end up shooting. He's a really, really great passer and quick decision maker, and I think we're going to see him a lot on some of those short rolls and things like that. And I think his passing skills can sort of alleviate some of those shooting concerns, because if you play off of him, it's going to be a really easy pass. But you can also get into some dribble handoffs with him because he's a big screener. They're going to have a great screener with him in the offense. And then just overall things like offensive rebounding. He was one of the best offensive rebounders in the NBA last season in the playoffs. So he adds a lot of different dimensions to the Thunder. And then he's a really nice rim protector to throw next to Chet as well.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they use Hartenstein both with Chet, without Chet. When you look at the offseason, as we've seen kind of the picture come together with their draft class, with the Caruso-Giddey trade, with the Hartenstein signing, what do you envision Hartenstein's role being in terms of, will he start next to Chet? Will he play primarily off the bench? Will they kind of blend the two together? What will it look like to you in terms of the rotation, which is always hard to predict with Mark?
That's exactly it. It's hard to predict with Mark. And although he was very, very consistent with the starters last year, in the past years, as we know, and some of that's just sort of the roster and injuries, he wasn't very consistent. He'd switch it up all the time. And maybe this is just recency bias because they just won the title, but I see something similar to the Celtics where it's just sort of matchup dependent, where if you play a team with more bigs, Hartenstein gets a start. If it's more of a traditional team where it's just one big and it's a lot of bigger wings and things, maybe it's Caruso, maybe it's someone else. But I think that Mark is going to tinker with things a lot of times, and we're going to see quite a few different iterations of the starting five with the core four of Shea, Dort, Dub, and Chet.
I think that with Hartenstein, when he does play next to Chet, I think that there's something in between. Like, I don't think that they're going to start Hartenstein and Chet together and like have that be their permanent starting five.
Yeah.
I think there's opportunities where you can do that against bigger teams should you need to. But I also don't think that they're going to only play, 2% of the minutes as a team with Hartenstein and Chet together as they do with Jay Will. So I think it'll be somewhere in between those two things. When you do get to see Hartenstein and Chet, next to one another, what about that is exciting? What about that, raises some questions for you?
Exciting. I mean, defensively, you're going to have a lot of great rim protection help from both sides. I think it's going to be really interesting where we've seen this a lot over the past few years with bigger rim protectors like Brook Lopez will guard the low post guy, which allows Giannis to roam. When have we seen Chet be able to play like free safety or anything? He's usually tied up with a guy. So I think that's going to be really, really interesting to see. And then Hartenstein, I think that he brings a nice element that the Thunder haven't had of a guy who can roll on the pick and roll and really punish those mismatches and switches. Like, Josh was a really nice player, but he's not somebody you can throw the ball down to on a post up if he gets a guard down there, where Hartenstein, you can do that. And overall concerns, I guess I would say just the shooting is there to a degree, to the point of do teams really just leave him alone? But I think the passing alleviates some of that. And then defensively, maybe switching out into space, but you gave me some numbers about he's been much better at that than you would expect. So I guess it would just be the shooting, but maybe I'm just looking at it with rose-tinted glasses on.
Yeah, I think that the excitement comes defensively, like you mentioned, where you can put Chet in this unique position to be a Giannis, JJJ type of guy with Hartenstein. I think offensively, it really just depends. We don't really. I think that's the question is like, what is it like offensively? And it doesn't have to be a bad question. Like, it can be just a question of like, we don't know, because what if they do want to make Chet more of a playmaker, like Sam Presti talked about after the Josh Giddey trade? That changes the complexity of what you want to do. If they play together and Chet's not on the ball, well then he's probably going to be on the 3-point line somewhere, ready to catch and shoot, and you can utilize Hartenstein as a screener, which, if we're drafting like skill sets of Hartenstein, that makes me really excited about adding him to this team. I think one of the top picks would be a screen setting ability, because Shea and J-Dub have never gotten the benefit of playing with a screen setter who can create such space as Hartenstein can create for them. And so them getting downhill off Hartenstein will be really fun to watch. So I do think that this is a move that, even trying to look at it through all of the context, it's tough to find the negatives to this move with Hartenstein, because there's so many overwhelming positives, and even like the question marks, like the offense. I'm not sure how it looks right now, but how many true bad options are there? I don't think that there's many bad outcomes with Hartenstein on the floor. So this was a very unique setup to be able to land him on this roster. And I think it does kind of take them to the next gear after getting Hartenstein, because now you become a more diverse team, a team that can win in even more ways. Like last year, they could win in almost every way, but you saw, what teams with consistent size could do, not just like overwhelming size in one lineup, but 48 minutes of size, what they could do. Now the Thunder can match that, and they can match that very well with Hartenstein, and they have the luxury of quote unquote overpaying or paying a lot of money for the best backup big in the league.
Yeah, you mentioned the screening, and it's something I touched on a little bit earlier, but just the short roll as a screener, where I think the most iconic guy in that is Draymond with the Warrior system. And the Thunder don't obviously have that sort of shooting, but still, if you have Shea as the ball handler and they double it and it goes down to Hartenstein, you have Dort in the corner, or Kaysen, Isaiah Joe, J-Dub, Chet spacing the floor, and he's a really great decision maker on those, whether he's going to go up quickly or past those guys. So I think it's going to be really exciting. And then I want to make sure that I get this right. I don't think that this is the most talented team that Presti has ever constructed, but I think this might be the most complete all-around team that like complements each other team that he's built.
And we'll talk more about how this team plays off of one another and complements each other as we talk about Alex Caruso and what this team looks like as a whole coming up. But first, I want to say right now about our good friends over at Game Time. Check out Game Time right now for the last-minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Game Time is great. It's a great ticket marketplace for you to use. If you love going to Major League Baseball games this summer or anything you need a ticket to, you can go to Game Time right now and get that today because the last-minute tickets are there for you. So save up to 60% on buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. I love their all-in pricing as well. I love the fact that you see the entire price of a ticket up front. There's no surprise fees at checkout that you have to account for. It's all there up front. I also love the view from your seat. So you can get a panoramic view of your environment from your seat, from the app before you buy. That way, if you're going to a venue or an arena you've never been to before, you know exactly what you're signing up for. So go there right now and download the Game Time app, create your account, use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Again, create your account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase by downloading the Game Time app. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Thank you so much for making us your first listen every single morning, every single day. We're here for you, talking Thunder basketball. It's SEC Media Day week, so you can go back and listen to Locked On Sooners for all the coverage from that for OU. If you're an OSU fan, Locked On Pokes, and whatever other teams you're following, check them out on the Locked On Podcast Network. We're joined today by Michael Martin at Michael on Sports on Twitter. Let's Talk Thunder on YouTube. Michael, we've talked Isaiah Hartenstein. Let's go all the way back to Alex Caruso. The swap of Josh Giddey for Alex Caruso 1-for-1. Were you as floored as I think everyone was whenever you saw that was the value that the Thunder were able to get for Josh Giddey, a 1-for-1, swap of, hey, here's a much better fit for the Thunder. Here's a much better fit for Josh Giddey.
Yeah, I mean, I could not have been more surprised. I think that we all saw the high possibility of Josh getting moved, that it was a real thing. But for them to get that sort of value 1-for-1 without having to lose any picks was insane. And it's a perfect fit having him here. I mean, you get the sort of continuity of his past relationship with the organization and playing under Mark with the Blue, but he's a high field player. He's one of the best perimeter defenders in the world, and you're putting him next to Lou Dort, and you have rim protection with Chet and Isaiah Hartenstein behind him. I think that's incredible. And then offensively, he's become a much better shooter over the past few years, and he's a nice decision maker and tertiary playmaker. So I think that that's going to be really nice as well. And then he brings a championship pedigree as well.
So when you look at Caruso, I just think that you could not have thought up a better fit for this Thunder team than Caruso. I think that he was a player that complements everything that the Thunder try to accomplish on the court. He complements the players that are already on this roster. You mentioned his three-point shooting, his ability to defend 1-4 and really scale up and play, up defensively is huge. I think that the starting lineup is really as cut and dry as putting Caruso in that place of Giddey, and that'll be what you roll with for the most part. I don't think it'll be as rigid as last year's team was, like if these five guys are healthy, these are the five guys who play. But I think that the base line of like the starting five most of the time will be Shea, Caruso, Dort, Dub, Chet. Where are you at on the starting five? Just if it was you, if you were put in charge of this team, and then also kind of what you think the Thunder would do.
I would say as long as obviously all five of those guys are healthy, that'll be the starting lineup for 70% of the season when those guys are all active. Obviously, that's not going to happen. It's not a dream world. And then I think, like I mentioned earlier, you'll have your nights with Wiggins in there, Case and Isaiah Hartenstein, whoever it's going to be as your other man. But I'm with you. I think it's going to be mostly Caruso for the Thunder. I think that's what it's probably going to be, just having another veteran guy on the floor who replaces Josh, who can do some similar things, but really is great at a lot of the things that Josh just wasn't able to do well, just with his skill set. And it allows them to play 5 out instead of the more mismatch hunting system to sort of put pressure on other teams. So I think that's what the Thunder will probably end up doing, but I'm curious to hear what you think.
Yeah, I still believe the Thunder will for the vast majority of games they'll play the starting five of Caruso for Giddy, and then you can intermingle some Chet Hartenstein lineups. But I think that people are maybe underselling the benefit of having all 48 minutes covered with rim protection. A luxury that the Thunder just could not do last year. Like there was no lineup, there was no combination that could have gotten them 48 minutes of rim protection last year. And if you play Chet and Hartenstein together, two bigs who already are not conditioned and used to playing a boatload of minutes, if you as many times as you play them together, you are then sacrificing some minutes on the back end of that and kind of getting you back in that same conundrum that you found yourself in last season. So I think that part of the benefit is they don't care. I don't think that like they're paying a quote unquote backup $30 million. They got their team better. So is a more reasonable price tag for a backup center $25 million or $20 million? Sure, okay, fine. But I think that they look at this and maybe they think that like the luxury of being able to pay $5 more million for the best backup big man and not give up anything else. No draft picks, no young players. They kept everything intact. I think is a massive benefit, and the fact of like using him as a backup. I think he's willing to do it. I think that he's comfortable in that role, and using him as a backup makes your team better than playing double bigs. I think for the vast majority of matchups. So I do think that would be the starting five for this team. I think that we are on the same page there. Taking you back to the day after the Mavericks series ended, and the foul on PJ Washington, the confetti comes down in the AAC. The Thunder are out of the playoffs in the second round. What was your expectation for next season and for the team next year then compared to what it is right now? Has it changed at all for you?
I'd say it's changed. It's hard to sort of quantify what the expectations were directly after because there was so much up in the air in terms of like the free agency money, what was going to happen with Josh and other decisions. So I was expecting improvement, maybe like around conference finals, sort of like to finals, I guess, ceiling. But now with all these additions, I think that it's almost like I don't want to say it's conference finals or bust, but that's sort of my expectation. Obviously, things can happen. There are weird injuries, weird matchups, but that's sort of where I am at mentally with this team, just based on their roster construction and some of the leaps in growth that I'm expecting from some of the younger guys like J-Dub, Chet, Kaysen, and others. And Shea's not done improving. He's not in his prime yet. So I think that there's still some ascension left on the roster, but there's still some weird things that can happen.
Yeah, there are certainly some curveballs and injuries and like you said matchups, and sometimes you run into a matchup where maybe you are better than that team, but you just happen to play your worst basketball that week and you lose in the playoffs. So it is tough to quantify like what the expectation is in terms of like finishing, but I do think that this team now has catapulted themselves into that championship conversation, and the short list of teams like on opening night, when you really purse through who of the 30 teams can you easily see without squinting, without trying to do some mental gymnastics, can you really see them winning an NBA championship? The Oklahoma City Thunder are on that list. And when that's the case, every game means more, every stretch of the season means more. And you really have to capitalize and try your best to capitalize on it. And I think that the Thunder, what they've done is they have capitalized on this opportunity. Like they've built a championship level roster. I fully believe that the Thunder's role players are good enough to win a title. What they're waiting on and what the missing piece is, when does J-Dub and Chet, when do they get to that level of like being a playoff number 2, a playoff number 3? Because we know what Shea is. Shea proved that he's like a playoff 1 type of guy. He's good enough to win. But whenever that day comes, that Chet and J-Dub are ready, what the Thunder have done is they're prepared for it. Like if that happens this postseason, they have a title roster then, and they're ready to go. If it doesn't happen for another postseason or two, they still have a title roster then. So like they've prepared all that they can. Now you're just betting that day will come for those two guys, and I think that that's a worthwhile bet. So I think that they've done a lot to put themselves in that championship caliber team.
Yeah, they've cleared the way for those guys, and it's now just on them of are you going to grow into those spots or not. I think for Chet, I think it's more easily I guess, quantifiable with him, with Hartenstein now on the roster, because we saw how tired Chet got, which it's just, he was getting beat up that entire Mavs series on both ends, so that was going to be tough. I think that's going to make it a lot easier for him offensively, where he's going to have more juice to go shoot. He's going to have more juice to beat guys off the dribble and do things like that. As far as Dub, I think that's the biggest question of the season, is just what level of leap growth does he take? Because defensively, he was really great in the postseason, but offensively, there was some left to be desired. And I'm really hoping with the addition of guys like Hartenstein and Caruso who can add some extra playmaking, we can see Dub go more as a scorer in those second units with Shea off the floor. I mean, that's one of the things I took away from the playoffs was Dub saying, if like it's a tough balance. I have to go out there and I got to set up all my teammates and I have to go hunt mine. If you can have extra guys who are sort of table setters for the offense and allow him to go be more of a scorer, I think that's going to end up helping you in the long run.
Yeah, and you get that out of benefit of like seeing the physicality, seeing the emotional swings, seeing it all up close in the postseason. So they've done everything necessary to go win a championship. It now comes down to Chet and J-Dub taking that next step. And that's the pressurized situation you find yourself in whenever you're a top guy on an NBA roster. And I don't think that anyone's going to shy away from that. And I think that it's a good gamble. I think it's a great bet to bet on those two guys taking that next step, just based on what we know about their work ethic and their developmental track record as players. So it's exciting. It's an exciting time to watch the Thunder. Coming up, are they the favorites out west? Who are they contending with, and more? We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your teams every day. Thank you so much for making us your first listen every single morning, every single day. We're here for you, talking Thunder basketball. Michael, we're back, and we're talking Western Conference. Vegas believes, our good friends at FanDuel, that the Thunder are the favorites out west. They're the favorites in the West. They're the number 2 title odds behind just the Boston Celtics. Do you agree that the Thunder are the top team in the West?
I think it's tough to say they're not. I mean, I understand that the Mavericks just beat them and went to the finals and all that, but these additions, without any subtractions at all, I think are really put them over the top. I think that they're the team to beat in the West, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they'll have the best record in the West next season, as we've seen with different injuries and weird things that have happened. And then as far as the teams they're competing with, Minnesota's going to be up there. Just that's a given, with Anthony Edwards taking another leap and sort of just the defensive, I guess, baseline that Rudy Gobert gives you for an entire regular season. The Mavericks, I think, got better in different ways, but also worse in different ways, just with some of their perimeter defense, but they added more offensive juice with Clay. They're going to be up there. And then Denver, they've lost a lot with KCP. I think that's an underrated just loss for them as a depth piece, but you have Nikola Jokic, who's one of the best players in the world, probably the best player in the world, so I'm refusing to count them out, but that's sort of my top 4-ish, but I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think that for me, there's a clear top 5 of like teams that I really think are high level basketball teams. And like the West is so tough because 10, 11 teams think that they can make the postseason and that they can make it to the next step. And I think that all these teams will be decided by less than 3 games, like from almost every spot, like you can get there. And so it's going to be tough to like actually nail down the actual like placements of these teams. But in terms of who I believe in the most, the Thunder are the team I believe in the very most. They've done everything possible to build a championship roster, and they've accomplished a lot this offseason. Whereas when you project the step for Chet and J-Dub, then they just become an unbelievable force to be reckoned with out west. I would then go Dallas. I think that at worst, they went laterally this offseason. At best, whenever you put Najee Marshall next to Luka, whenever you put Klay Thompson on this team, yes, he looked washed last year, obviously, but what does that look like next to Luka and Kyrie? Like, I think that they went laterally at worst. At best, and you lift them up with Luka, they could have been really good additions. Then I have Denver, just because I cannot shake the top of like Murray and Jokic. I know that they've lost a lot of depth. I know that there's question marks on how some of those guys will boost themselves up, but I just can't shake Denver. Minnesota, you mentioned it, Ant, the bigs, maybe a last hurrah. How long can they keep this team together as they get expensive? Then I go Memphis at 5, and I think that Memphis is going to be spectacular. If they're healthy, that was the one place that Zach Edey could go where I'd really like Zach Edey, because now you've given him on defense the protection of Jaren Jackson Jr., the protection of Desmond Bane on the perimeter. You've given him a team that already has the infrastructure in place to take on a traditional big offensively. Where like John Morant has had success playing with Steven Adams. He's had success playing with Valanciunas. Like these guys have succeeded with this archetype before. And so now you get all the benefits of Edey with the infrastructure to counteract the negatives of Zach Edey. So I really think that Memphis will be a top 5 team in the West this year. And so that's my top 5. But yeah, I think it's the Thunder's West to lose, and we'll kind of see what happens.
I'm glad you mentioned Memphis because they're one of those teams I think that are going to be really good, but it's sort of just like I want to see it again because it just feels so long since we've seen Ja for just an extended amount of time. But you mentioned it with Edey. He's sort of a perfect fit for them. I wasn't super high on him on the draft either, but they insulate him almost perfectly in terms of, like you mentioned, with Triple J, where he can be a rim protector and roam. Offensively, Triple J can space the floor. And then with Ja, you mentioned those screeners that if he's had a lot of success with, he's already one of the quicker and more athletic players in the league with a dynamic first step. If you let a giant of a man like Edey get that screen and give him that much more of an advantage to get downhill, it's sort of like what we saw with Russell Westbrook earlier in his prime with Steven Adams, where it's just the daylight and he's just gone. He's in there. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this next season plays out. I mean, there's going to be something wacky that happens that it does every year where something unexpected happens where a team launches. I mean, who expected the Thunder and the Wolves to be at the top of the West this time last year? So it's going to be really interesting to see how things play out.
Yeah, I think that the Grizzlies are going to be that team that perhaps gets forgotten about or overlooked as you start to do this preview stuff. But we'll end up showing you why they were so electric and so good before the injuries and suspensions and all that happened to them later on. How much do you buy into the Denver downfall? I think that there's two school of thoughts kind of right now of like either everyone's just freaking out they lost Bruce Brown, they lost KCP, or they're just like, well, they have Jokic and Murray, which is kind of where I fall.
The Bruce Brown thing, I understand why people are upset, but it just made no sense to sign him to that deal. That was just sort of like a poison pill of a contract that the Pacers put him on that was just impossible to match without hamstringing yourself. KCP, yeah, I think that the owners should have dipped into the luxury to pay for that, but I don't think it's over, but I'm more skeptical of their depth because you have guys like Christian Brown who have to play a lot more and others who are just less proven. And KCP, although not one of the better players in the league, is a really dynamic role player who's won at a high level in multiple places. So I would say that I'm not counting Denver out, but I think that their margin for error is a lot smaller or slightly smaller than it was before.
You have every right to change your mind because we're doing this way too early here in the middle of July. But where do the Thunder finish next year when the postseason's over? Are they NBA champs? Are they Western champs? Are they out in the second round? Are they out in the finals? Where are they at?
God. Well, obviously we are glued to these. No way we can change it. I'll say the Thunder go to the finals, but the Celtics go back to back, unfortunately.
Celtics going back to back as they literally run their entire team back from last year is a good bet. It's the favorite in Vegas. I agree. I think that the Thunder do make it out of the West, and like this team is just it's really hard. Even if you want to try to like contrive these holes in their roster, where do you even begin to like fake outrage about this roster? This roster is like complete top to bottom, and so it comes down to your opinion of J-Dub and Chet. We both are very high on those two guys and the way that they can progress over this offseason, over the course of the 82-game season, and taking the lessons that they learned in their first run with them to next season. So it'll be a lot of fun. Michael, thanks so much for joining us. You have plenty of stuff out there about Isaiah Hartenstein and Alex Caruso and the new look Thunder. Where can they find all your good stuff?
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's on Let's Talk Thunder on YouTube, which is my YouTube channel. Most recently, I just had a video come out about OKC's Godfather offer for Isaiah Hartenstein and about whether it's an overpay and sort of his fit on both ends of the floor. It's around 20 minutes. It's a pretty big film deep dive with some jokes in there. And then Alex Caruso's fit with the Thunder as well, I released a couple weeks before that, before we knew the Hartenstein stuff as well. And that's really gets more in-depth in my thoughts about some of the things I mentioned here about his versatility offensively and defensively and what he brings to the roster along with the continuity with Mark.
So go check out Let's Talk Thunder on YouTube. You can find him again at Michael on Sports on Twitter. Thanks for joining us, Michael. And until next time, be good and be good to one another.